Hello and welcome to this brief introduction to how to use the Assessment of Core CBT Skills Scale, the ACCS. This brief video will provide you with an overview of what the ACCS is and provide some guidance about how to use the ACCS scale to rate CBT competence. The ACCS is freely available. You can download a copy of the manual, the feedback form and the cover sheet which therapists would submit with their ratings on the website that you can see on your screen. That's www.accs-scale.co.uk. This research was supported by a grant from the British Association for Behavioural and Cognitive Psychotherapies, the BABCP. This was awarded to myself, Kate Muse, and to Frida McManus. We conducted this research in affiliation with the University of Oxford's Department of Psychiatry and the Oxford Cognitive Therapy Centre. We'd also like to highlight the involvement of Sarah Rakovchik and Helen Kennelly, who contributed to the development of the scale. Furthermore, a number of individuals were involved in the evaluation of the ACCS scale. Particularly, we'd like to highlight the involvement of staff at OCTC, the First Step IAP service, University of Derby CBT course and the South of Scotland CBT course. The ACCS scale provides a framework for rating therapist performance within an observed CBT treatment session. That could either be a recording of a treatment session or a recording of a role-play session. The idea is that it provides assessors with a framework for providing summative feedback, so numerical ratings about different aspects of performance, but also really crucially it provides a framework for assessors to deliver more formative, in-depth skills profile about the therapist's areas of strength and areas that they may need to develop. As well as that, it is designed to provide an opportunity for self-reflection so that therapists can use it to rate their own performance within a CBT treatment session. The scale assesses therapist performance on the basis of 22 different areas of competence, or 22 different items. These items are grouped together into 8 different domains. So we have agenda setting, formulation, CBT interventions, homework, assessing change, effective use of time, fostering the therapeutic relationship, and effective two-way communication. You'll notice that some of these are core general therapeutic skills that we would expect to see across a variety of different modalities, not just CBT. So things like interpersonal style, empathic understanding. Some of these aspects of competence are CBT specific, so things like agenda setting or reviewing and setting homework. Each item included in the scale was identified for inclusion on the basis of a review of relevant literature and theory, which identified these aspects of competence as being central to the effective and competent delivery of CBT. In particular, we drew upon and built upon what was already available there in the Cognitive Therapy Scale and the Cognitive Therapy Scale Revised, developed by the Beck Institute and Blackburn and colleagues in 2001. We also looked at Roth and Pilling's competence framework from 2007 and used those to define these core areas of competence. The scale is designed to assess competence in the delivery of a range of behavioural and/or cognitive therapies. The scale is also designed to assess competence in the delivery of CBT for individuals who are experiencing a broad range of different mental health problems, so in that respect it's considered transdiagnostic. It's also designed to target competencies that would be evident within an active mid-treatment session. So this focus of the scale means that it doesn't assess all possible disorder and protocol specific skills that would be evident across each stage of treatment. So for example, disorder specific skills like video feedback in social phobia or reliving in PTSD don't appear as individual items, although those would be captured by the CBT interventions item within the scale. Similarly, initial skills that are shown in setting up treatment, like goal setting, or those that appear towards the end of treatment, like relapse prevention strategies, don't appear in this scale. We chose to take this approach because using a disorder or protocol specific approach would mean that we would need to develop lots of different competence measures for each different treatment protocol or different problem area, as well as the inclusion of a number of items which may not be applicable to the majority of sessions that were actually being rated. We also wanted a scale that was applicable to a wide range of training and practice settings, so including those that were where clinicians actually delivered a variety of different CBT protocols and worked with patients experiencing a wide range of different mental health problems. So that's why we decided to focus on those skills which are evident in an active treatment session and those that are relevant across different treatment groups and protocols. The scale was also developed with individual CBT in mind and with adult clients in mind. This is because the literature suggests that the competences required to deliver effective CBT are somewhat different within the context of a group-based CBT intervention or with children and adolescents and older adults. That being said, we have had a number of individuals who have explored using the scale within the context of services for children and young people and older adults, and who seem to suggest that the scale might still be applicable within that context. So that's really something that perhaps requires further exploration. I'll now outline the 4 key steps involved in using the ACCS scale. So step 1 involves gathering all of your assessment materials together. The most important thing that you need is a video or audio recording of a treatment session. As I said, this might be a role play session or it might be a real treatment session with a client. Ideally, ratings should be based upon material which contains the most amount of information possible. This enables us to make the most accurate rating that we can. It's often not possible to sit in or view live a treatment session, so we typically rely on recordings. Video recordings are preferable to audio recordings because you get more contextual information about the relationship between the client and the therapist. But audio recordings do provide enough information to be able to complete the ratings. Ideally, it would be useful to have a transcript of what was said to use alongside viewing the video or listening to the audio. Again, that's not always possible, but it is a useful additional layer of material to use if it is there. As we've mentioned previously, the session recording should be based on an active CBT treatment session. What we mean by that is something which involves using CBT treatment techniques. So not one of the first assessment sessions and not one of the last and finishing up relapse prevention sessions. Should also be based on a full treatment session, not segments of a session. And this is because the reliability of individual items is poorer when assessors only view segments. So a number of aspects of competence are also not assessed using this method, so you might miss out some important elements involved within the treatment session. In addition to submitting a recording of a session, we encourage therapists to submit a cover sheet alongside that for assessors to look at. You can see a copy of this submission cover sheet on your screen, and you can download a copy from the ACCS website. You can see that this submission cover sheet provides some really important contextual information: the stage of therapy, patient's presenting problem, treatment goals, the agenda, and so on. Also important to note on here is that it includes a copy of the formulation. So where a formulation is completed by the therapist and perhaps is shared with the client or not, then that should be included in written or diagrammatic form to give the assessor contextual information about what formulation the therapist is working from. We also encourage the inclusion of any materials that are used in session. So if a thought record, for example, or a diary was completed for homework and brought in or was completed during the session and discussed, then we would encourage either a photograph or a photocopy of that to be submitted alongside the recording. Really, this just provides as much contextual information and as much detail as possible. The other two key things that you'll need to complete an assessment are the user manual and feedback form. So the user manual provides some guidance for assessors about how to make judgments about the quality or skillfulness of a therapist's performance using the scale. So this is the information that we're going to go through today. So we would recommend that you spend a bit of time watching this video and reading and familiarising yourself with the manual before you conduct an assessment. Initially, we tend to find that people need to refer back to the manual for each item when they're completing a rating, and that will probably be the case for the first few ratings that you complete. This means that it does take a little bit more time to complete the ratings when you're unfamiliar with the scale. What we found over time is that people become more familiar with the items, what they mean, and they have to refer back less and less to the manual. And so the ratings do get quicker and easier to complete. The feedback form is then used to complete both the numerical and the written formative feedback that you would give to the therapist, or that the therapist might be completing themselves if you're completing a self-rating. So again, this can be downloaded from the website, and you can complete it either in electronic format using the Word document, or obviously you can print it out and complete it by hand. The next step is to watch the session recording and to take some notes. So what we'd suggest doing is opening up the feedback form, and you can see here we've got domain 1 agenda setting in the feedback form, and under each domain you'll see some space to write about key strengths and learning needs. So we'd suggest whilst you're watching the recording, you note down any key aspects relating to each of the domains. So you can see here that I've made a couple of notes for myself saying that clear and specific items were identified, some items were perhaps omitted, and there wasn't any prioritisation of items. Just a few memory joggers of things that I noticed whilst I was watching the session recording. We would then say rate the performance and type up those notes in full in a useful formative feedback structure at the end after you've watched the entire session. So now that you've watched the session recording or listened to the session recording, made some notes, you're now ready for step 3, which is providing numerical ratings. So for each item, you need to provide a numerical rating ranging from 1 to 4. 1 indicates limited performance, 2 indicates basic performance, 3 indicates good performance, and 4 indicates advanced performance. You can assign either 1, 2, 3 or 4, or if you think the therapist falls between 2 descriptors, you can select a half mark, so 1.5, 2.5 or 3.5. What we would say is not to be afraid to use the full range of the scale. So if the descriptors are indicating that someone falls at 1 limited performance, then use that to indicate that level of performance. Similarly, if the performance descriptors are indicating that someone is working at level 4 advanced, then equally use that numerical rating rather than only using the range in the middle from 2 to 3. You'll see in your manual and feedback form that we've provided overarching scale descriptors to explain what we mean by limited, basic, good and advanced. We've also provided item-specific exemplar therapist behaviours. These are concrete examples of behaviours consistent with each scale point within each item. These exemplar behaviours are intended to provide a bit more guidance as to the type of performance which is consistent with each point on the rating scale for each particular item. So now we're going to have a look at the overarching scale and the item-specific therapist behaviours within the context of the CBT interventions domain. And particularly we're going to have a look at the item 3.5, reviewing interventions. So this is looking at therapists' ability to conduct a comprehensive review of the results of the intervention in order to help them identify learning. So first of all, let's have a look at the overarching descriptor for number 1, limited. So we can see that the definition here includes either that the therapist failed to include the feature outlined, so it may be that they didn't set an agenda, for example, or that the therapist demonstrated a significant absence of skill or an inappropriate performance, which is likely to have negative therapeutic consequences. So let's have a look at what this means within the context of the reviewing interventions item. We can see here that number 1, limited, includes the therapist not implementing any CBT interventions, so this is the omission of the feature outlined, or an absence of skill or inappropriate performance, which may be, for example, that the therapist failed to review or conducted a really brief or cursory review of the results of the interventions, and that review didn't really help them to identify any learning. So it might be something like they asked, "How do you think that went?" with no real further follow-up beyond that. Let's have a look at number 2, basic. Again, let's see what the generic descriptor is first of all. So we can see that basic is that the therapist's performance is somewhat appropriate with some degree of skill evident. However, there are some major substantive problems. So within the context of our item of reviewing interventions, we can see that major substantive problems might involve the therapist reviewing the results of intervention. So there is a review there, and there's some attempt to highlight learning implications, but with some limited skill. So they may have struggled to relate the results back to the relevant cognition, behaviours or motion that they were designed to target, for example. Perhaps they didn't address any negative results, or simply told the patient in quite a didactic fashion what they'd learnt from the experience. Moving on to 3, good. Here we can see the generic performance banding is saying that the therapist demonstrates a good degree of skill with no major problems, but there might be some minor problems or perhaps inconsistencies in the therapist's performance. So sometimes demonstrating high level of skill, but sometimes there being some problems. So let's have a look in the context of our reviewing interventions item. Here we can see that good degree of skill with minor problems or inconsistencies might mean that the therapist adequately reviewed the results of the intervention, whether they were positive or negative, and that this review did help the patient to independently draw some conclusions about what they'd learnt from that experience. So using kind of curious Socratic questions to examine outcomes in relation to the prior predictions. And so finally, looking at number 4, advanced. Here we can see that the generic descriptor shows that the therapist consistently demonstrates a high level of skill. So it's a consistently high level of performance with only a very few and very minor problems. So we're not saying that this is absolutely 100% perfect. There may be a few slip-ups, there may be a few minor problems. There's always opportunity for further development and learning. But we are saying that actually the performance is at a high level of skill and it is consistent. So if we have a look in the context of our reviewing interventions item again, here we can see that consistently high level of skill might involve really skillfully engaging the patient in a very thorough and comprehensive review of the results of the intervention, and that being whether they were positive or negative. Really helping the patient to independently draw conclusions using those kind of curious Socratic questions to help them draw out really useful and relevant learning implications. And these being linked back to relevant cognitions, behaviours or emotions that they were designed to target, and also linking in well to the individual client's kind of formulation and or treatment goals. It's important to try and avoid the halo effect. So we want to score each item independently, avoiding those kind of overall global impressions. So what we mean by the halo effect is when kind of performance is unduly affected by the overall impression of the therapist's performance. So you tend to get uniformly high or low ratings rather than getting kind of specific feedback as to the particular areas of strength or weakness. So what we want to do is to really look at each individual item in turn and think about where the therapist was falling on that particular item. And it's likely that they'll vary across different domains and items. One question that comes up is, what if therapists demonstrate behaviours which are not in the item-specific exemplar therapist behaviours provided for that item? Well, although these kind of exemplar behaviours are designed to provide some more specific guidance as to how to use the scale, we certainly recognise that this can in no way provide an exhaustive list of all possible performance indicators, all possible ways of the therapist behaving within the session. So what we would say is, if something comes up that's not in those item-specific exemplars, go back to the overarching scale definitions. So as you can see in the screen in front of you here, think about, well, was that performance in line with 2, in that it was some degree of skill evident, but there were some major substantive problems? Or was it actually that there was a good degree of skill with no major problems, just a few minor problems and perhaps some inconsistencies, in which case you might want to award a 3. Good. Another question that comes up sometimes is, what if therapists demonstrate behaviours from more than one performance banding? So, for example, let's have a look at the choosing suitable homework item. If we saw that the therapist selected homework related to key maintenance cycles discussed in the session, we're thinking, excellent, this is really good. I'm going to give this an advanced rating of 4. But actually, the homework task was a bit too challenging for the patient, which is actually looking at performance banding 2. What we want to do is then think about where this fits in terms of the overarching definitions. So we might want to think, actually, this was a major substantive problem, so we'll give them a rating of 2. But what we can do is use the qualitative feedback section to really highlight those areas of performance that were consistent with that high level of skill. Now you've provided a numerical rating for each item, you can provide the total score. So there's 2 different ways that you can do this. You can either add all of the item scores together and you get an overall total score. To help with interpretation, we've provided the total score that a therapist would achieve if their performance was consistently rated as 1, 2, 3 or 4. So if it's consistently rated as 1, you get a total score of 22, consistently 2, a total score of 44, consistently 3, a total score of 66, and consistently 4, a total score of 88. You can also provide an average item score. So this is calculated by dividing the total score by the number of items, 22. So this gives you an indication of where the therapist is falling overall across all the different items. We also provide the opportunity to provide a global performance rating. So this is really the opportunity to provide an indicator of where you think the therapist fell overall across all aspects of the session. So here again you'll be rating them from 1 to 4, using those half marks if you feel that they fell between 2 of the descriptors. And the final thing to rate is patient complexity. So we've just got a very simple rating from 1, very straightforward, 2, somewhat straightforward, to 3, somewhat complex, 4, very complex. So patient complexity hasn't actually been incorporated within the scoring system of each item. And this is because we didn't want to kind of unduly confound the ratings. So we didn't want it to be that you could only achieve a really high rating if you demonstrated performance in the face of difficulties or added complexity. So we didn't want to prevent those who are working with more straightforward cases from being awarded high performance ratings. But we did want to provide some context. So we wanted assessors to be able to understand the context within which that performance rating was provided. So it may be, for example, that if a therapist has submitted a lot of tapes with very straightforward clients, that actually, if this was part of a supervision package or a training course, that the therapist might want to be encouraged to submit more complex presentations so that their performance could be assessed within the context of those more complex cases. So now you've provided your numerical ratings, you're ready for step 4. So this is the final step where you're providing qualitative feedback. So this is a really important aspect in terms of development, providing feedback for therapists, or where you can reflect on your key strengths and learning needs if you're completing a self-assessment. So you can provide qualitative feedback for each domain, so not each item individually, but each domain where the items are clustered together. So for example, for domain 6, effective use of time, you'll be thinking about key strengths and learning needs in terms of overall use of time. And then at the end, there's an overall skills profile where you can draw together overall key strengths and overall therapist learning needs. So what we'll be looking for in this qualitative feedback is really identifying those most important strengths and learning needs, giving really specific examples to explain where those strengths and learning needs fell. So what assessors have often done when using the ACCS scale is to use some of those exemplar therapist behaviours that are provided in the behavioural anchors for each item when they're explaining what the strengths and learning needs are, and also then obviously drawing on the session material that was viewed. We're also looking for weaker domains to think about suggesting more skillful ways of working. How could the therapist further develop their skills in this area? And obviously what this helps to do is to aid further development and really encourage progression. So this video has provided you with an overview about how to use the ACCS scale. What we would suggest is that you now take some time to practice using the ACCS. This is a really important part of getting to know the scale and developing reliability with other team members. So if you want to make sure that you improve reliability across the group of people who you'll be using the scale with, so it could be other assessors on the training course or other assessors within your treatment service, that you go away and complete a rating of the same session independently. And then you come together as a group to discuss that rating. For each item, consider what score did you provide? Was this score the same or different from your colleagues? And why did you provide this score? Then you need to think about reaching a group consensus so that you can make sure that you're all on the same page in terms of how you're using the ACCS scale. So thank you for listening. If you'd like more information, you can contact me on k.muse@walk.ac.uk, or you can have a look at the ACCS scale website to find out more information and download the feedback form, the manual and the submission cover sheet.